All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. We're going to completely demystify the cell cycle today using simple, everyday logic. I know, the cell cycle can feel super overwhelming with all the heavy jargon, but we're breaking it down into a really visual, easy to digest journey. So if you've ever felt intimidated staring at biology textbooks, well, you are definitely in the right place.
First off, let's adopt that what's in it for me mindset. We really have to understand that this division is literally the biological solution to how we grow, heal, and exist. Think about it for a second. Every single one of us started as just one solitary cell, a zygote. Yet today, right now, you are a wildly complex organism made up of trillions of beautifully functioning cells. How is that even mathematically or physically possible? Well, the whole secret lies entirely in the cell cycle.
So here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with why cell division happens, then hit the cell cycle basics, dive into interphase, which is like exam prep, play the S phase game, and wrap up with the M phase and the G0 stage.
All right, section 1. Why cell division? The absolute need to multiply.
Because without cell division, we couldn't grow past that single cell or even heal a simple paper cut. You know when you get a bad scrape on your knee and a few days later, perfectly new skin has formed? Well, those are completely new cells that were created just to replace the damaged ones. It's amazing. And similarly, for any organism to reproduce and pass on its legacy, specialized cells, gametes, have to be manufactured from scratch. So really, growth, repair, and reproduction are the ultimate why behind all this division. Moving on to section 2, let's look at the cell cycle basics, specifically the actual timeline of a cell.
Now, what is absolutely incredible here is that a typical human cell takes exactly 24 hours to complete one full cycle of division. Every organism has its own internal clock, right? For example, while our cells are taking an entire day, a tiny single-celled yeast pulls the whole thing off in just 90 minutes. But it makes you wonder, what is our human cell actually doing for those entire 24 hours?
Well, the crucial takeaway here is that a cell spends 23 out of 24 hours just preparing for the final exam, and only one single hour actually taking the test. We divide the cycle into two main phases. Interphase is that massive 95% chunk of time. Historically, scientists called it the resting phase, but hey, do not let that fool you. The cell is incredibly active. It's just prepping behind the scenes. The actual division, the M phase or mitosis, is super quick, taking up only about 5% of the cell's entire timeline. Which brings us to section 3, interphase, the massive exam prep, and by far the longest phase. Think of this timeline as your progress bar for the cell's journey. It shows the logical sequence of preparation before the big final split. Interphase is further broken down into 3 distinct checkpoints, G1, S, and G2. You can basically think of G1 as the first gap, S as the synthesis phase, and G2 as the final gap before that main M phase event. During these gap phases, the cell is furiously gathering resources. It's bulking up its size and duplicating organelles, so literally nothing is left to chance. In G1, the cell is metabolically highly active, physically growing larger. We're going to talk about the S phase in a second, but looking at G2, the cell is finalizing its toolkit. It's creating essential proteins and quite literally making copies of heavy-duty organelles like mitochondria, so that when the cell finally does split, both new daughter cells will have enough cellular machinery to survive on their own. Okay, section 4, the S phase game. This is arguably the absolute core of the entire explainer. Think of this phase kind of like a parent doubling their property before passing it on, so both kids get a full, equal share without any fighting. Deep inside the nucleus lies our DNA, the ultimate instruction manual. You can't just cut that instruction manual in half. Both new cells desperately need the full manual. So in the S phase, the cell undergoes DNA replication, meticulously synthesizing a perfect, exact duplicate copy of its genetic code. Now, the math here is the absolute golden rule of the cell cycle, so lock this into your brain. The DNA amount doubles, but the chromosome number remains exactly the same. Let me explain that, because it sounds weird, right? The new DNA strands that are synthesized actually stay physically attached to the original strands. And because they're still glued together, we still count them as the same number of chromosomes. So the volume of material jumps from 2C to 4C, but the chromosome count stays right at 2N. Understanding this whole N versus 2N thing is essential. When we say 2N, we mean diploid. Almost every single cell in your body, your skin, your liver, your heart, has 2 copies of each chromosome, one from each parent. The only real exceptions are your reproductive cells, the gametes. Those are haploid and carry just one single copy, or N. Knowing this difference is huge because it helps you understand exactly what the cell is trying so hard to protect and divide. All right, final stretch. Section 5, M phase and the G0 stage, the execution and retirement. The 23 hours of studying are officially over, and now it's finally time for the 1-hour exam. The M phase is actually elegantly simple in its logic. First, you divide the brain with karyokinesis, and then you divide the body with cytokinesis. You obviously can't split the cell until you've safely segregated the replicated DNA into 2 distinct new nuclei. Once the nuclei are successfully and safely separated, the rest of the cell's cytoplasm just pinches off and divides, giving you 2 completely independent, fully functioning daughter cells. Now, this nuclear division happens through 4 rapid-fire steps of karyokinesis: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. This is honestly where the magic happens. The DNA condenses, aligns perfectly right in the middle of the cell, and then these specialized structures called spindle fibers literally hook onto the chromosomes and yank the duplicated genetic property apart to opposite sides. It is a highly mechanized, absolutely flawless biological dance. But here is a really fascinating twist for you. Not every cell actually takes the test. Cells like our heart muscle cells and brain neurons enter what's called the G0, or quiescent phase. They basically choose a peaceful retirement from dividing. They are still highly metabolically active. I mean, they keep your heart beating and your brain thinking, but they completely step off the replication treadmill. They just do their specialized jobs without the constant, exhausting pressure of dividing. So, looking at the big picture, the cell cycle is just this flawlessly orchestrated sequence of growth, duplication, and precise division that keeps us alive every single second. From that singular initial cell to the massive, complex web of tissue that makes up you today, this cycle is the unsung hero running constantly in the background of your existence. And that brings us to a really mind-bending question. If our cells possess this perfect, flawless machinery to constantly repair, double, and replicate themselves, why does the process ever slow down? Why do we eventually age, get wrinkles, and lose the ability to heal like we did when we were kids? I'll leave you with that thought to ponder. Until next time, keep exploring the incredible machinery inside you.